Hello and welcome to View from the Markets, coming this week from London. Now, one of the key themes that has recently sent government bond prices on a rollercoaster ride is a question of whether we are heading for an inflationary or deflationary climate. Many people have been concerned that inflation could soon be back, but one of those who's been bucking the trend is Hugh Hendry, founder of Eclectic Asset Management. So earlier I asked him just why he's still a bond bull and why he thinks that actually deflation is the biggest risk of all.
I've never known a moment where a trade has become so crowded, and that trade would be this absolute certainty that the future is going to result in inflation. And not just any old inflation. People are using quite severe language, and there are notable contrarians and commentators who are comparing America's monetary policy with Zimbabwe, and they're not just saying inflation, they're saying hyperinflation.
Well, if you look at the numbers, though, I mean, the type of quantitative easing that people are engaging with is certainly pretty startling compared to recent history. I mean, will that not lead to inflation?
Well, if you look at the numbers, as you say, prices today on the high street are falling in America and in the British economy, and indeed across Europe. That never happened in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, 1990s. So that's a new phenomenon. And it's almost as if we have this flood, and yet people are buying, they're buying fire insurance, and that's quite, you couldn't make this stuff up. Now, quantitative easing, I take issue with that because there is no precedent that says quantitative easing succeeds. None. I'll give you one, actually. There is one, because there was some quantitative easing exercised by the Federal Reserve in 1933-34, and it did initiate a dramatic economic recovery without inflation, but a dramatic economic recovery. But I hesitate to say that actually that was a success of quantitative easing because it was preceded by a 46% collapse in nominal GDP. So perhaps if you're telling me that nominal GDP will collapse by 46% next year, then I would believe, and I'd come back to you and I'd say, then quantitative easing might have a chance in succeeding. And the reason why it would have a chance in succeeding is owing to the odd nature of the bond market and the vigilantes of the bond market. So what we have today is we've seen that the private sector has tightened the screw on the economy. And by that I mean we've tightened monetary policy. 10-year yields have approached 4% rather in America. 30 years approached 5%. And today getting a mortgage is more expensive than it was at the start of the year in America. So we're tightening the screw, and that makes me fearful.
But in terms of the amount of money that's being pumped into the economy, do you not think that's going to feed into higher prices further down the road? I mean, where do you think that money is going to go if it doesn't stoke up asset prices?
Quantify the money, okay? Because the issuance of money, why is it happening? It is happening, again, owing to unprecedented events. And that unprecedented event is that in the last decade, the American economy volunteered to take on $54 trillion. Now that is 1 times global GDP, and it is approaching 4 times the size of America. That's off the radar. Okay, right. Now, America is a $14 trillion economy. M3 is $8 trillion, and the proposal and indeed the actions of the Fed have been to expand their balance sheet by about $1.5 to $2 trillion. I say it's a piddly amount versus the 12 trillion which has been eliminated from the loss in wealth from the great fall in asset prices in the last 18 months. That's why we're seeing the Fed attempt quantitative easing to offset this 12 trillion which has vanished, and we've got in its place 2 trillion. I don't think that's enough. So the public sector is expanding, the corporate sector, the private sector is still contracting.
And so how would you see the current consensus on equity markets? I mean, until really a few days ago, people were pretty bullish. We've now seen quite a correction. Do you think then the fact we've had a correction means it's time to jump back into equity markets?
I have no divinity on the future. Okay, so everything is conjecture. I have great misgivings about the equity market. I'm deemed to be a contrarian. What I'd say to you today is that I'm joined in being a contrarian by everyone today. In the last 30 years, I view the last 30 years rather from the very low equity markets in the mid-1970s. In the United Kingdom, the stock market has gone up 52 times. Now, from an extreme low, if you will, but I would say to an extreme high. And in America, it's about 30 times. And there have been sell-offs, tremendous sell-offs, the crash of 1987, 1998, the economic weakness in 1991, the bank crisis of Latin America. And throughout it all, it paid to buy pain. It paid to go the other way and buy falling prices. Yeah? And therefore, we see this Pavlovian response to the events last year when the stock market fell almost 50% across the world, that it is reignited again, that Pavlovian response that now one has to be bullish on equity, on property, on risk. Now, that makes sense if the next 30 years are going to perpetuate forward. I reject that. I don't believe the next 30 years are going to perpetuate forward. And I say that because the series has been broken now for 10 years. Equity markets are no higher. So the unprecedented 30-year expansion is now, I think, behind us. And so I look not at 30 years, but at 300 years. And it makes me reject contrarianism, which favours falling prices. So if you think of how we began today, I'm deemed to be contrarian because I favour government bonds. If you look at a price chart of government bonds, they are in a positive trend. They're trending higher. Not in the last 6 months. Last 6 months, they've been desperately poor. But the last year, the last 2 years, the last 3 years, the last 4 years, the last 20 years. And what I say to you is the bull market in government bonds is historic and epic in proportion. And epic bull markets end not with a whimper, but with a huge bang. They end with capitulation when everyone comes in, and yields, I believe yields could reach lows that would just be outrageously low, and everyone would be sucked in. And that would be because the economy again withers at the margin and is forced to contract. But that is conjecture. So when you ask me about the stock market, I reject its temptations. Albeit I have to say to you, I don't believe markets crash when it's sunny. Risk aversion works, but it doesn't work when it's hot. It works when it's cold. I keep saying to my investors that my flower opens up in the winter. I have a winter opening flower, and that's when risk aversion is more relevant. And so I'm not fighting this market, but give me the end of August and the beginning of September, and I'll start prodding it and asking it questions.